This is episode 8, Breaking Down the Wall. Not all the help I grew up with were angelic. Some of them were characters with flaws, but I loved and accepted each of them for who they were. Here I'll share a story from my book, Stand There and Look Pretty, Darling, written as a tribute to a man named James. Hi, I'm Sue Rabe, and this is Living Your Authentic Life podcast for women over 50. January is a time of year that reminds me of another person who lived on the place. James was about a 55-year-old African-American man who worked on my father's land. He was the handyman responsible for putting up and taking down our Christmas decorations in the front of our house. He would put up Merry Christmas, a wooden cutout painted red, on the banister upstairs until just after Christmas, when he would return and put up Happy New Year, which was cut out of the same material but in green. There were other wooden decorations put out in the yard: a reindeer, a cowboy Santa with a campfire, a standing Santa, along with a few other decorations that I cannot remember. But I do know that the yard was very busy, so busy that a friend once commented that our yard looked like Woolworth's, which was the 5 and dime store that carried lots of decorations. James also helped with putting up our tree, which was quite large because we had 14-foot ceilings, and my mother thought that we needed to fill up the space with a really tall tree. After New Year's, after I went back to school, James returned to town to take down all the decorations. When he was decorating the banister, he went out the door to the upstairs porch at the end of the hall, right by my bedroom. One year at Christmas, I received a $10 bill from Santa in my stocking. I put the $10 on my dresser and left it there to decide how to spend it. When the holidays were over, I went back to school, and when I returned home later that day, there was a $5 bill on my dresser. I was bewildered, and I went to my mother and asked her if I had received a 10 or a 5. I was confused. She looked confused also for a few minutes, and then she smiled. As her face lit up with recognition, she said, "Yes, it was a 10. James was here today to take down the decorations, and he was in your room. He must have spotted your $10 bill sitting on the dresser. James never takes it all, so he took some and left some, and now you have a 5. He left you change." I was puzzled that my mother was so matter-of-fact about this incident, and she did not express any anger or promise to speak with him and get my other $5 back. She had accepted that this was just the way he was. I realized that I was not really angry either. If James needed 5, I was glad to share with him. But I was grateful that he made change, and I still had some money. $5 in the mid-50s would pay for lots of 25-cent movies. James was good with his hands, and his special talent was masonry. After my parents put in a new driveway, James came to town to build some brick walls around the new drive. It took him a couple of weeks to complete the task, preparing everything before he added the concrete. I was intrigued by his level and watching the bubble. The structure that he was creating had a solid set of bricks at the bottom, and then the top had bricks staggered so you could see through the top part, with each opening about half the size of a brick. These openings looked like a great place to put your feet and your hands, a perfect way to climb the brick wall. James finished the wall, and after eyeing his work, he cleaned everything up and packed his tools in his car to head back to the bottom. He was getting into his car when I decided to take my first climb to try out the new wall. I put my left foot in the lowest space with my fingers around the top opening and began to pull myself up. James jumped out of his car and was saying, "No," as I pulled myself up onto the wall. Suddenly, it began to crumble and fall over. The cement was still wet and could not stay together with my little hands and feet pushing and pulling on them. The bricks, still wet with cement on them, were at my feet. I never even fell over, but just jumped off in time to avoid injury. I was embarrassed that I had caused the wall to fall and ruin James's work. James opened up his trunk, pulled out his tools, and began cleaning the cement off the bricks before it hardened more, as he knew that he would need to start over the next day. He did not react to me. He just went to work. If it had been one of my relatives, I would have been in big trouble. But James did not say a word. He just did his job. I cannot imagine being in his place when this thoughtless little white girl had just ruined his entire day's work. He was a good sport, but did he have a choice? James was a nice-looking man. He'd been married to Virgie, the woman who also worked for my dad. She was a great cook, making everything very tasty. When I think back and remember the yummy food she made, it's a wonder that no one died of clogged arteries. She could make vegetables into carbs, as her squash casserole had lots of ground crackers, onions, and cheese. You could barely find the squash, which was the way my dad liked it. She was great at disguising those healthy vegetables. Okra was fried crispy, and the fresh peas in the summertime were delicious, with pork fat cooked in. Those real chunky mashed potatoes with thick cream gravy did not need a disguise. Rolls were homemade fresh daily, and desserts were made fresh every other day, usually a pie with lots of meringue, which was awesome. I did not partake of breakfast, but I am certain that it was terrific, with eggs, bacon, sausage, biscuits, lots of gravy, and syrup. It's no wonder my dad had a triple bypass later in life. Besides cooking, Virgie also washed and ironed the family sheets, as they were all cotton and quite wrinkly in those days. If breakfast, lunch, and ironing were not enough to keep her busy, she also looked after my dad's secretary's toddler for several years until she started school. I remember a time when the stove at the house out in the bottom, where all the delicious food was prepared, would not stay closed, so Virgie propped it closed with the broom. My stepmother stated that we couldn't let Virgie come to town, as she might see our stove and want a new one. I was confused by this because I think that my family could have easily afforded a new stove. After all, cooking was her main job, and she did it so well. She needed the right equipment. I'm not sure how long James and Virgie were married, and I do not know why they split up, but I do know they had a son, Willie B., the one that I renamed Fruit Cocktail. Years later, when I was in high school, James came to town to do some carpentry work, and while he was there, he spotted our very attractive city maid, Mazel, who was much younger than he was. I guess he was quite the smoozer, because before I knew it, Mazel was dating him. This was in the late 60s, during the time of soul music, and there was a song that was very popular by Candy Station called I'd Rather Be an Old Man's Sweetheart Than a Young Man's Fool. I loved to tease Mazel, so I would put the vinyl record on my stereo record player with the sound turned up really loud and sing the lyrics to her until she blushed. I would then turn off the music and we would laugh and talk about guys and how silly their behavior was. She was a very wise woman, or at least she seemed to be to a 17-year-old. Mazel had a nice build, light skin with a pretty complexion, straightened black hair, and a tooth with a gold cap around it with a star cut out of the middle, which always intrigued me. This style of cap was a popular way to decorate yourself back in the 60s. Maybe today she would have a tattoo or a pierced nose. Mazel was a city girl. She did not ever live out on the place, but she had James wrapped around her little finger. When I think about James, I feel warmth in my heart, and I still regret making his brick wall tumble. But he was always so kind, patient man with a smile on his face. Thoughts of Virgie make my mouth water, while thoughts of Mazel make me giggle. All these people helped to make our lives easier, and they also helped to shape my life in wonderful ways. I'll always be grateful to them. Postscript. A year or so ago, a wonderful young couple bought the house that I grew up in. It had fallen in disrepair as the previous owner had not taken care of it. It had lots of rotten wood, the banister from the porch on the second floor had fallen, and some of the windows, the glass was missing. This beautiful home looked like a haunted house. The house needed lots of work, but thankfully the couple was up for the task. They have been so kind to me and the rest of my family, asking lots of questions about what went on while our family lived there, what it was like to grow up living in such a grand home, and what the residents were like. The wife and I have become fast friends, as there was an instant connection. We share a meal often, and we have wonderful conversations, like we have known each other forever. As part of their renovation, they decided to put a fence around the property. It would be a wrought iron fence with brick columns. In order to carry out this new design, some of the remaining fence, built by James, which was still standing since the mid-50s, needed to be moved. When one of the columns was about to be picked up, it fell completely apart to reveal a bottle in the center of the brick column, a bottle of tequila. The bottle still had a swallow of liquid in the bottom after all these many years. No wonder James was so nice to me. He had something to take the edge off. I'm guessing that he had his bottle and was about to get caught when he had to place it inside the column and keep working, only to hide his liquor from not only my mother or one of the children, but also from himself. I wonder if it was left in the center of the column because he forgot he put it there, or it was a quick way to stash his booze. I wish I could go back in time and observe what happened that day. Did you ever have a relationship with someone who wasn't honest, but you cared about them anyway? I hope this story is insightful for you. Add your ideas or experiences to the comments or send me an email. By the way, this is an excerpt from my book called Stand There and Look Pretty, Darling. Right now, you can get a free download of the first chapter by going to Mary Sue Rabe, spelled R-A-B as in boy and E.com. Go to the free tab. So that's my webpage. Give it a look. Also, please subscribe to this podcast if you like it and leave a comment. Thanks.